Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. My name is Sybil Nelson. I work at FAO. I'm coordinating the SCALA program, which you'll hear more about today. And it's my pleasure today to be your moderator for this session. Today's session will last about 2 hours, and it's all about applying the Climate Action Review, or CAR tool, which helps in prioritizing and implementing adaptation solutions in agriculture and land use. So please do introduce yourself in the chat, your name, where you're working, what you're working on. We'll also have a little poll in a little while for introductions. But for now, it's my pleasure to hand the floor over to Julie Tang, UNDP. She is a climate change adaptation specialist and also global coordinator of the SCALA program at UNDP. And she will give us an introduction to this session. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you very much, Sybil. Thank you to all the participants for joining us today. I think we have almost 80 joining us. And it's my pleasure to open this UNDP FAO webinar. I think it's very fitting that this is taking place at the very beginning of the climate conference in Bonn, where NDCs and NAP's progress is going to be reviewed. To date, 22 NDCs, I believe, have been submitted this year, and 63 NAPs, and this is a big year for NAPs and NDCs. So we believe this is a very timely webinar. We hope this tool will contribute to the formulation of your NDCs and your NAPs, and having this very practical introduction to the tool will serve this purpose. Before I start, I wanted to just remind you of a few housekeeping items. The first one is to please keep your microphones off, and if you wish, you can put your video cameras on. The second thing is, as you have noticed, this is being recorded, so I hope this is okay with you, and we would understand if you had to leave because you didn't want to be in this recording. And the last one is that we will be using the chat box, the Q&A box rather, for questions and answers. So please put your questions there. We want this session to be very interactive, so don't hesitate to ask any question, however basic you think they are, because this is really your time to interact with the team that has designed this tool. Next slide, which has the agenda. So the objective of this webinar is to introduce this CAR tool, and it's really to provide you with a step-by-step approach, to also give you tips as to how to apply it, to get an example from Mongolia on how they have used it both for SCALA and for the NDC 3.0 formulation. And as I mentioned, the designers of this tool are all in this webinar, so it's a really good opportunity to understand how this tool works and how to adapt it. And finally, we will have a bit more of a dedicated session on how to adapt it specifically for NDC 3.0. And Sybil will close this webinar at the very end of the session. With this, I hand the floor back to Sybil.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So as you see, it's a very full and definitely interactive session. So let me reiterate Julie's comment to please do use the Q&A box and keep introducing yourselves in the chat. Thank you so much. Our opening remarks today we're very honored to have a special guest with us. We have Julia Morozo-Garman from the UNFCCC. She is the regional lead at the Regional Collaboration Center for Asia Pacific. I hope I've gotten the full name correct, Julie, and we're so pleased to have you. Thank you. Over to you for some opening remarks to set the scene for today's conversation.
Thank you very much, Sybil, and hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and warm greetings to all participants joining us today for this important online training session on the application of the Climate Action Review, or CAR tool, jointly organized by UNDP and FAO. On behalf of the UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center for Asia and the Pacific, I would like to thank our partners, some of them longtime friends, for the opportunity to address this event. For those less familiar with the RCC Asia Pacific, we are the regional arm of the UNFCCC Secretariat in Asia Pacific, and we are based here in Bangkok, Thailand. Our mandate is to support countries across the region in implementing the Paris Agreement focusing on both adaptation and resilience as well as mitigation, including engagement with non-party stakeholders such as civil society, the private sector, and the indigenous peoples and local communities. At the heart of our work lies collaboration, both with governments and partners. That's why we are pleased to have been involved with the SCALA program, which is co-led by UNDP and FAO, which supports countries in transforming their agriculture and land use systems by integrating them into both national adaptation plans, or what we call NAPs, and nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, not only in planning, but crucially in implementation. The importance of NAPs and NDCs cannot be overstated. These are not just planning instruments, they are cornerstones of national climate policy and international climate ambition. And when designed and implemented effectively, they provide a clear roadmap for climate resilient development. Agriculture and land use are foundational to both adaptation and mitigation, and as emphasized under the Global Goal on Adaptation and IPCC assessments, they have been consistently highlighted as vulnerable and has high potential for climate action. But these potential can only be realized, of course, with the right support, tools, and knowledge to inform decision making. And that brings us to today's session. The Climate Action Review, or the CAR tool, is more than a planning tool, and it's a decision support mechanism. It enables stakeholders to identify, assess, and prioritize climate actions that are feasible, fundable, and impactful. I would like to congratulate, of course, UNDP and FAO for developing this tool. And tools like CAR can play a role in helping countries develop a robust, actionable strategies for agriculture and land use, strategies that are often integrated into the NAPs and the NDCs. 2025 is considered a pivotal year for climate ambition as countries submit their NDC 3.0 and advance their national adaptation plans. And our call is to ensure that we must implement these plans. Updated NDCs and NAPs should be bolder, better aligned, and implementable, serving as blueprints for real transformation. And this requires streamlining our processes, aligning our priorities, and integrating our plans across sectors and ministries. And it also means developing realistic and well-resourced roadmaps, something that NAPs are uniquely positioned to provide, especially when linked effectively with NDCs. This direction is already being reinforced at the international level. Last month, the LDC expert group released the draft updated NAP technical guidelines, and these updates emphasize the need to align NAPs with the adaptation component of the NDCs, incorporate priority themes of the GGA, and develop resource mobilization strategies to ensure that implementation can be financed and tracked. And in this context, we must recognize the value of tools like the CAR, which empower us to translate ambition into action. And they allow us to move from intention to investments, from plans to policies, and ultimately to tangible progress. Again, I would like to thank UNDP and FAO for organizing this session, and of course for having us in these webinar. And in closing, I would like to encourage you to fully engage in today's session, ask questions, share experiences, and explore how the CAR tool can implement or complement your national efforts in NAP and NDC development and implementation. Thank you, and I wish you a productive and inspiring session. Over to you, Sibyl. Thank you again.
Thanks for that, Julie. I mean, really helpful to put this global context here at the start. I really liked what you said about NAPs and NDCs not being, just documents, but really the cornerstones and helping us set the roadmap for real implementation. So thank you for that context, the broader context. Now we'll go back to the other Julie, Julie Tang of UNDP, who's going to give us the context for today's tool, where it came about and what it's all about, before we then dive into the tool itself. So Julie, over to you.
Thank you, Sibyl. So to start with, you will notice that a lot of the examples and the tool was designed for land use and agriculture. So just a brief reminder of why it is important to act on climate in agri-food systems. It's the most vulnerable population that will be touched by the impacts of climate change in agri-food systems, as they heavily rely on agriculture for their livelihoods. We already see a lot of impact. We also know from the IPCC report that SDG 2 on food security will not be achieved if we don't act on climate. And at the same time, we know that SDG 13 on climate is not going to be reached if we don't act on agri-food systems. Next slide. So there's a big gap in action and in finance. And for that, we really need to move from incremental to transformative climate action. And the way that we defined transformative climate action based on the literature was around those 6 elements. One, the whole of government approach, because this is not just about the Ministry of Environment. Of course, the Ministries of Agriculture need to be engaged, but also trade, commerce, gender, planning, finance. And it's really what is needed for a systems level approach that can be transformative. The climate rationale is a key aspect of this, obviously, since we're talking about climate action. So it needs to be rooted in risk and vulnerability analysis and in projections in terms of climate change. Technological innovation is also really important to be able to scale up action. The sustainable development aspect I've already mentioned, with very clear linkages to different SDGs, and climate action must be aligned with development plans and be mainstreamed into all development planning and budgeting. Then another aspect is on gender and social inclusion, because we believe that inclusivity is key both for designing the best solutions as well as for implementation. And finally, private sector engagement is one of the key criteria we looked at, because, as I mentioned, there's a big gap in finance and we need to engage the private sector if we want to scale up investments. Next slide. So this is why the SCALA program was designed. We know that we've been doing planning for a decade on NAPs, on NDCs. It's been a bit more recent, but a lot of countries had their first and second NDCs. A few countries had their NAPs, and a lot of countries had climate priorities in various sectoral plans and national development plans. But sometimes those plans remained at a fairly high level. And when we designed SCALA with the support of the German Ministry of Environment, we identified this gap between the high-level targets that countries have in the NDCs and the NAPs and other climate plans and the actions that need to be undertaken. So SCALA was really designed to occupy that space and unpack NDCs and NAPs and other climate plans and make them actionable and transformative. Next slide. So this is how this SCAR tool came about. We, at the very beginning of SCALA, thought that we needed a tool that could help countries further unpack and further prioritize the adaptation targets that they had in NDCs and NAPs or others, and look at it through those 6 dimensions that I just mentioned to identify the ones that had the biggest transformative potential and that they could prioritize under SCALA. So many, if not all of the 12 SCALA countries have used this tool to look at what they wanted to focus on the SCALA. And we've learned a lot. We've adapted the tool following the first application, and what you can access in the next slide with the QR code is the result of the application and the adaptation to make this more user-friendly and more applicable to broader context. I won't talk about it much more because my colleague Crystal Kumpler will talk about this tool on a step-by-step basis, and you'll be able to ask questions about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I hope that helps explain a little bit how we got to where we are today with today's session. Thanks, Julie, for reminding us. And thanks, everyone, for introducing yourselves here in the chat. It's great to see it's such a wide range we have here joining us from very many countries in Africa and Asia. I suppose the time of this event makes it a bit difficult for colleagues in Latin America to join, although I did see at least one from Costa Rica, so thank you. But let's move to our Zoom poll, which is where we're going to find out a little bit more where we're from and what we're doing, like who's in the room with us today. We have over 127 people and counting, so great. But let's hear more directly from you. So we'll launch our first short Zoom poll. Nisha is going to bring that up, I think.
I've already shared that. Do you see it?
Oh, I'm not seeing it, but maybe others are.
No, we can't see it.
Okay, let me try again then because
We have Bertrand in the chat saying, okay, I see it now.
thank you.
I think we'll
Yeah.
start to see some answers now. Great. So the first question indeed is, where are you from? We want to know where you're joining from today.
Sybil, do we need more time or can I end the poll now?
Yeah, let's see the results. Great. So as the chat already predicted, we have a lot of colleagues here from Africa and Asia today. So thank you everyone for joining us. And again, please do feel free to keep introducing yourselves in the chat. So let's go to our second poll question for this portion of the call. And the question here is to better understand your role in adaptation planning, to understand how you might be using this tool. So this is an open-ended question. And it is, what do you do in your work to contribute to adaptation planning? I saw in the chat there are some students, so maybe you're still studying or you're interested in playing a key role. So uh, please share also your interests and where you see your role in adaptation planning. I also saw we have some UN colleagues, we have some government colleagues, so it'll be interesting to see all of the different roles we have to play in adaptation planning. Hey, give everyone another moment to submit a thought.
I think we can keep it on for another minute. We have that much.
Okay, good. Yeah, this takes a little bit of thought.
Time to type it out too. So yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, last chance to type and submit. Let's see what our answers are.
Okay, so we're ending the poll now. Hopefully everybody had a chance. Somehow I just see the numbers increasing. I don't know, Sybil, what do you think? Should we give it 30 more seconds?
Sure, 30 more seconds.
Just let people say what they want to say.
Okay, we have almost 60 responses, so that's great. Yeah.
And even when we end the poll, and if somebody wants to share, what their role is, please feel free to use the chat box. And all of this will be recorded. Can we end the poll now? I think we need to do that. Sharing the results. Do you see?
Okay. I don't see the text that people have
Oh,
submitted.
okay.
Maybe if you can see it, you could just read some of them, Nisha.
Yeah, I just have to share my screen and I can show the results. Is that okay?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So these are the answers. I think the biggest one is climate. We have answers like I'm an agricultural officer, project officer at an NGO, helps assessing nature-related risks. Sybil, if you want, you can also just kind of go through these if you want to share with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, already I'm seeing a range, right? Someone wrote working directly with farmers, another is updating capacities, advising clients on adaptation strategies, and arranging finance. So the financial component of adaptation, which we also heard Julie mention, data and evidence, guiding the private sector transitioning to sustainable practices. We have someone here managing water security, plant health management. So we can see adaptation requires a vast range of skills and vast entry points, right? We have creating awareness, of course, right? We only change practices with awareness, raising the topic, making more salient. Interesting, great to see that, the kind of advocacy side as well. Disaster risk reduction, anticipatory action, climate risk concerns for smallholder farmers, supporting countries on NAP formulation and implementation. So, of course, the policy planning processes. Great. So I think we have a lot of clearly different types of expertise and awareness in this setting. So really looking forward to the kinds of questions and insights you'll bring to the session, to the tool itself, ideas about applying it, ideas about improving it, even getting youth involved. Excellent. Um, yeah, when we talk about, this is supposed to be used in a multi-stakeholder setting. So how do we get the youth involved in these discussions around setting and priorities and implementing action? Great. So I think it would be interesting if we can figure out a way to share these results because it's really helpful to see what everyone here is doing. And I see we've had even more people join since we began this poll. So welcome those of you just joining. Please do put your introduction in the chat. We've just been capturing here through this poll the different ways everyone here today is working on adaptation planning. So I think with that, we'll close this this interactive poll portion, and now we're going to dive into the interactive demonstration of the tool itself. So we've heard the context of NAP and NDC planning. We've heard about the challenges of moving from planning to implementation, and you've heard about this SCALA program, FAO and UNDP working together that developed this tool. Now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Crystal Crumpler, who is a natural resources officer at FAO, who was the lead in developing this tool. And she's going to walk us through step by step how this tool is used. And she'll have time during her presentation to pause for Q&A, so you are invited to interact. So without further ado, Crystal, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sybil, for setting the stage. That's really useful. Now we'll dive into kind of the content of the tool, right? So next slide. Right, so the CAR tool is designed primarily, as said, to support adaptation planners and practitioners, right? In that transition and kind of crossing the threshold from NDC and NAP planning to NDC implementation, and in doing so in a way that accelerates transformative change in the agriculture and land use sectors, right? To achieve that, this tool is presented as a practical step-by-step approach that users can adopt to plan and identify which of the actions in their national climate plans, so NDCs and NAPs, have the highest transformative potential for the sector, and then guide them in the preparation of actionable roadmaps for the implementation of those prioritized climate actions, right? So this means that the tool is especially useful for NDC and NAP project development and programming, but also for finance mobilization, right? Because it helps to unlock those critical levers of systems change and address key risks to investment, right? And lastly, I just wanted to mention that the tool is flexible in nature, so it can be easily adapted to different country contexts and users' strategic priorities, right? Next slide. So in short, the tool has a few important core functions and features. As I mentioned, it supports the transitioning from NDC and NAP planning to implementation. It allows us to assess the potential of planned adaptation efforts and entry points for transformative change. It can also serve as a guide for designing multidimensional strategic interventions for delivering on NDC and NAP priorities through adaptation projects. It can also be used in its monitoring and evaluation function, so to be able to iteratively track the contribution of ongoing adaptation efforts to transformative climate action. It's inclusive in the sense that it facilitates communication with and between policymakers, financiers, other stakeholders, key for unlocking finance. And lastly, it fosters multi-stakeholder engagement, right, and collaboration due to its kind of participatory modalities. And ultimately, by using this tool, it's the hope that country planners would have strengthened capacity to steer future adaptation projects, programs, and interventions towards climate resilient agri-food system transformation, right? Next slide. So the tool is organized, like I said, around steps. So there's 5 steps in the process that are outlined here. What's important to note is the first 3 steps can be completed in an online interface of the tool, or alternatively in an offline Excel sheet. Whereas step 4 and 5 require a multi-stakeholder workshop or kind of key informant interviews, right? But it's really the participatory segment of the tool. So step 1 is the prep phase, which I'll walk us through. Step 2 consists of the shortlisting of adaptation priorities from NDCs, NAPs, and other climate plans relevant to agriculture, which will then be assessed for their transformative potential in step 4. Step 3 is the stakeholder mapping, where we are ensuring that the key stakeholders required are consulted in the planning phase. And step 4 is the actual assessment of the transformative potential of the shortlisted adaptation priorities, right? And finally, step 5 is the moment in which we start to develop actionable roadmaps for the implementation of the transformative climate actions identified and prioritized, right? So let's look at step 1, which is then the next slide. So step 1, as mentioned, involves preparing for the consultative assessment. So this includes establishing the coordination team, defining the purpose of the assessment, selecting its modality, and collecting all of the relevant policy documents, which serve as the starting point, right? NDCs, NAPs, LTS, or other national or sectoral climate plans, which contain the adaptation options that will be reviewed. So after completing step 1, the output would be a long list of, maybe 20 to 30 adaptation options generated and sourced from these national or sectoral climate plans. Under step 1, this is where, we're forming the coordination team, which should consist of, lead government ministries, department, or agencies that are tasked with coordinating the assessment. And then other representatives from government or civil society or other institutions that are involved in climate change and agricultural planning and programming in the country. So this includes like NDC focal points or NAP focal points or more planners, right? And in the handbook, you'll find more details on how to form this coordination team and what exactly the specific tasks of each of those individuals would be. this is also where we select the modality of the assessment, right? So we said it can be either more of an in-depth approach or a rapid assessment. So an in-depth approach would be kind of a 2-day participatory multi-stakeholder consultation to exchange on knowledge and information that's valuable for assessing each adaptation option against transformative change potential. And it's the moment in which we're looking at the climate action capacities, needs, and outcomes that will allow us to assess the transformative potential, right? Now, the second option is the rapid assessment. So that's where you might not have the capacities to organize a multi-stakeholder engagement workshop, but you could conduct a desk review alongside key informant interviews, right? Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of the tools interface in step 1, which is where we're collecting the relevant policy documents. So the assessment lead would be responsible for that. What are the key policy documents? And this really represents the starting point of the assessment, right? Because it contains the national adaptation priorities in the agriculture and land use sectors. Next slide. So after having collected the relevant documents, then you would be asked to identify the key adaptation options within those documents, right? And here is where we start to create our long list of adaptation options. And we're also qualifying each of them, right? So we're qualifying what is the adaptation objective stated in the policy document? What is the relevant sector or subsector or value chain or ecosystem to which this adaptation option pertains? And then lastly, what is the scale of intervention, right? Is it a particular geographical area or agroecological zone, or maybe an administrative zone where the adaptation option is expected to be implemented? And the handbook provides some useful guidance on how best to extract information on those different adaptation options within your policy documents. Next slide. So I'm going to stop after each step just to, because it's a long, there's 5 steps, right? Just to give us a chance to kind of reflect on what was presented and just a buffer before going to the next step. Sybil, did you want to share the questions?
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. So yes, we thought we would ask you, participants, why do you think this step is important? And do you see that this is relevant in your context and how? So please, anyone who might have an answer to one of those questions, or if you have a question yourself already for Crystal, I think this first step is fairly straightforward, right? It's helping us see, establish what is the framing, what are the policy foundations that through the next steps we would be seeing where we could play a role in implementing. I'm just seeing you're welcome to put a question in the Q&A box or raise your hand if you want to intervene by speaking. And as Crystal said, though, we will have more chances for interaction as we go forward. Yes, we see you have connection issues. That is a challenge. This is being recorded, and we've shared in the chat both the tool itself and the handbook, as well as other relevant links. So you're welcome to also, open those in another window as Crystal's speaking along. I'm not seeing any hands at this stage or any questions in the chat. Maybe people are still getting oriented. So I think if there are no questions at this stage, we could, save some time and maybe add time later to the next Q&A portions. Okay, we have one question. Yeah, step 1's pretty straightforward. We do have a question here in the chat. There are some assessment tools that usually used by organizations. How can we integrate with many assessment tools? For example, LCA. Crystal, do you have a response there?
Yeah, I think, I guess LCA is like life cycle assessment, if that's what you mean, but also please come in. I think that is the challenge, right? There are multiple tools serving similar but often different purposes. The reason that we developed this tool in particular at the onset of the SCALA program is because while concepts of transformative change were being discussed at the very high level in global climate change conferences and within the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report, there was this call for urgent transformative or transformational change. We didn't find that kind of guidance particular to the agricultural sector. And because the agricultural sector is so complex and ranges across so many different dynamics and farming systems and agroecological contexts, that the concept of transforming an agri-food system needed to be kind of broken down into more practical guidance, right? And so we looked at what did the literature say, what are the key drivers of transformation change that are relevant to agriculture. So we hoped that this tool was going to fill that, that gap, right? And then within the SCALA program, we saw it as the perfect kind of piloting context to pilot this very high level concept in a very practical, on the ground manner. And so that I think is kind of the thinking behind the tool, and it allowed us to refine it and ultimately disseminate it to a global audience. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah,
thanks. Yeah.
I just quickly wanted to say that I have the job of being the timekeeper, so I just wanted to say it's probably time to move on to the next step. Though I do see some hand up, and Lito, maybe you want to put your question regarding step 1 in the Q&A, and I'm sure Crystal will get back to you on that. Thank you.
Okay. So should we move to step 2?
Yes, let's move to step 2.
All right, so after we've completed the kind of long listing of adaptation options, which was the conclusion of step 1, step 2 is focused on screening each of those adaptation priorities to see the extent to which they're aligned with the user's strategic mandate and area of programmatic interest, right? So this might be a government ministry or a civil society organization or an international organization with a mandate in supporting climate action in the agricultural land use sectors, right? Now, this step is where we also will review the current status of implementation of each of the adaptation options in the NDCs and NAPs, which will serve useful for us because it says where are there gaps in implementation or where are there opportunities to scale up successes, right? So it helps us to prioritize later what are the entry points for our programming. So the ultimate output of this step would be the long list of adaptation options narrowed down to around 5 to 10 adaptation priorities that then we can evaluate for their transformative climate action potential in the following steps, right? Next slide. So looking deeper into step 2, here you can see, on the left side, in the left column, you have the adaptation options that were identified or extracted from the NDC and NAP, followed by the respective objective, the sector, and the scale. And our objective here is to screen each of these against 3 criteria. So one is, what is the alignment with the user's strategic mandate? The second is, what is the alignment with the user's sector or subsector or ecosystem of interest? So you can imagine that some ministries are focused more on agriculture, others, if mangroves might be a mandate of the forestry ministry, for instance, and of course, civil society and international organizations also have their strategic mandates and comparative advantages, right? And criteria 3 is more the alignment of the particular geography or agroecological zone of interest, right? So some of us work in certain regions or at certain scales. And so it's a simple scoring, 0 to 5, what is the alignment? And then the tool will automatically help us to start to short list. Next slide, please. So this is the point where we look at the status of implementation of each of the adaptation options, and within, the coordinator of the assessment, which has that background on the status of implementation, would start to assign the status. So is there steady progress, so no supports required? Is there partial progress, so there's an opportunity maybe for scaling up? Or is there no progress and support is required? Next slide. And so the simple output of this step is our short list of 5 to 10 priorities, which are automatically generated by the online tool, which will serve as the basis for our consultative assessment in the following step 4. And here we stop again for any burning questions or ideas that you'd like to share on this kind of need to shortlist according to as we transition from high-level NDC NAP documents to our programming. The utility of the shortlisting, maybe you also have embarked in some of these processes. Sybil?
Yeah, thank you, Crystal. So we have an answer to your question already. Your question around why do we need a short list to prioritize which one is applicable and based on the resources. We have a follow-up question, though, from Chinwendu, who is asking, what should be done if the adaptation options do not align with all the criteria? And I give you a moment to think about that. We also, while you were talking, we had an interesting exchange where Lito from the Philippines was asking about, was saying that one challenge is the energy transition and that agricultural land is being converted to solar PV sites. And then we had a follow-up saying, yeah, how can we use this in an intersectoral manner, right? I think this is alluding to sort of the trade-offs, right, in land use. And I don't know if Crib wanted to come in on that point regarding the kind of the land use agriculture issues. Crystal, did you wanted to say something now, though?
No, I mean, I think these are all very good examples of the complex context within which a tool like this can be applied, which is what we'll get to the later stage when we start to assess those cross-sectoral interactions, right? Which is this issue maybe around energy infrastructure or, bioenergy generation using agricultural biomass and so forth. The question on, if if there's no alignment whatsoever, I never thought about that, to be honest, because I mean, the tool allows for a scoring from 0 to 5, right? So even the lowest level of alignment would be would fall at the bottom, and the highest level alignment would fall at the top. Now, I presume that a user of the tool is adopting it because they have a stake in either agriculture or climate action, right? So I assume there's some basic level of alignment there. But yeah, back over to you, Sybil. I don't see the chat.
Yeah, just quickly, Crib, you will hear from Crib later today, but I wanted him to come in on this question around the agriculture land use.
No, so that speaks to basically, apologies that my voice is a bit echoey. So it speaks to different elements of within the national climate policy space. So if we're looking at more in terms of the climate smart agriculture practices, yes, there's further erosion of agricultural land. But I don't want to pretend that I know exactly the country's specific context of this transition, because there are tough conversation needs to happen in the years ahead, because you need to balance both the commodity goods needs and agricultural products and agricultural production, rural communities, and so on, as well as the energy transition that needs to also happen that drives the our depend drive us away from our dependence on fossil fuel. So it's unfortunately it's a very tough conversation and really delicate, complex situation to navigate. Given that I don't have the expertise on the ground, I don't want to say how to exactly navigate that, but it's a very much intersectoral conversation, yeah, not just for agriculture or land use, but it's also about energy, it's also about sustainable development, economic development, and also really about community resilience as well. So maybe we can take this conversation offline or bilaterally. So please reach out to us if you have any additional questions.
Thank you, Crib. And I think we have a couple more questions that I'll feed to Crystal. But I think we'll move now to step 3, Crystal, because I do think the questions will evolve as they hear more about the next steps. So thank you just again to, we have Amit in the chat who also talked about shortlisting and how that helps sort of streamlining. And now we'll hear about the next step, which is about stakeholder mapping, right? And I think this gets back to Crib, right? Who's being consulted in the process. So over to you, Crystal, for step 3.
Thanks. Yeah, and I see we'll get to some of the other questions on the ranking later. So step 3 is the step that we'll be completing. It's the last step in the online interface of the tool before we move to either the stakeholder workshop or the desk review with interviews, depending on the assessment modality you've chosen. And this step does involve the mapping of the stakeholder groups. And the idea is that for each adaptation option, we're identifying the relevant stakeholders for those adaptation options. So if the example around energy and the installment of energy infrastructure on agricultural land, because the sectors involved there require energy and agriculture and land use actors, both would be identified in the stakeholder list, right? So this is why it's important to map those stakeholders particular to each adaptation option, right? And the idea here is that the more diverse the stakeholder group, the more accurate will be the representation of a country's adaptation priorities, capacities, needs, and challenges, right? So at the end of this step, we'd have, in the online interface, we would have inserted the relevant stakeholders, their name, their institution, all of that information with their contact details, so that the output of the online tool would be this kind of packaged information that will help us prepare for the workshop, which contains who are the NVTs, what are the options that we'll be exploring, who are the coordination leads of this assessment, their roles, a kind of package that leads us to the next step. So next slide is just an overview of the main stakeholder groups that the handbook provides guidance on that you may wish to consult. The handbook does go into detail about some examples of each of these main stakeholder groups. So governments, civil society, intergovernmental organizations and partners, range of private sector actors, and specialized research or universities and institutions. And I think one point to mention here is while we're mapping the various stakeholders to be consulted, it's important that we consider not only the stakeholder groups that are directly impacted by or vulnerable to the adverse impacts of climate change, so our direct beneficiaries, but also those actors or institutions that have an influence on the conditions underpinning that their vulnerability and their capacity to adapt and respond to climate change, right? So all of the actors that influence the social, the economic, the political conditions or enabling environment within the country, right? Next slide, it's where we pause again.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think so just to recap, we've seen the first step, which is about kind of establishing which policies you're focusing on in this with this tool. The second step is about sort of identifying a priority set of adaptation actions to assess through this tool. And of course, once you know the policies and once you know the adaptation actions, you need to have the right people with you. And so understanding who the stakeholders are is essential for ensuring that this is then done in a more participatory way. So, right, we're still in the preparatory phase. We're still in the phase you can do online or offline in Excel. But let's stop here because at step 4, we move to ideally a more interactive workshop setting if resources allow. And so, yeah, we'd like to hear from you. Why do you think stakeholder mapping is important? How might you go about organizing consultations in your country? I'm seeing in the Q&A, we also have some questions, so let me pull those up. Okay, Crystal, we actually had a question that was from step 2, but I think is also relevant going forward. It's a question about how are the weights assigned, right? The ranking of the actions. And the person is OI is saying, I'm interested to understand the ranking. So could you just touch on that, please?
Yeah, so the ranking I'll actually get to in step 4. I mean, in the first ranking, which was just the short listing, all indicators are treated equally. So there were the 3 criteria, right? The 3 areas of alignment. Now one can always go in and adjust that in the tool if you'd like to give, priority to one indicator over another. And in step 4, when we start to assess each option against the elements of transformational change, you will also have the option to adjust the indicator itself and the weight of the indicator. But at the moment, you'll see in the next slides the 6 elements of transformational change, the indicators underneath each of those, and all of them are equally weighted.
Thanks for that, Crystal. I'm going to feed you another question coming in from the Q&A from Srijita Dasgupta, who's actually asking a question about the variation between countries, right? How NDCs and NAPs, you know very well, Crystal, they differ across regions between countries. And so that level of detail could affect then, what information you're basing the tool on. And so she was wondering if we've observed differences between the countries. In terms of how they've been then prioritizing adaptation planning, and also wondering if there are instances where the tool is used for further steps once the transformative potentials were determined. Now, I could just jump in and say we will be hearing very soon from our Mongolia colleagues who can actually, I think, illustrate an answer to this question. So, Crystal, I don't know if you have any observations about, the applicability given the differences in different ways policies have been designed.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, because since the starting point of the tool is the NDC and NAP, and they don't have standard formats, and priorities are articulated very differently in each of them. The way in which the tool was applied in all 12 SCALA countries was actually very different. Some NAPs and NDCs have a lot of detail and context specificity with, quantified indicators, geographical areas identified, the climate risk that each adaptation option is addressing clearly stated, while others, that can be in the form of tables or bullet points. Other NAPs and NDCs, as you know, are more narrative-based and short, 10 pages. So that's why this tool is developed in a way that's participatory, and it relies on consultation. And the very first step, if you remember, was building up that coordination team of key stakeholders that have the knowledge of the NDC and NAP process and sectoral priorities. So it's that very first starting point is meaningful because it helps to fill those information gaps. Yeah.
I just quickly wanted to give a time check. We have another 12 minutes and we have 2 more steps to go and Q&A.
Great. Okay, so let's pause the Q&A here. I noticed a couple more questions in the Q&A, which we'll try to get back to typing away. But now let's give the floor back to Crystal for the very important step 4. Over to you, Crystal.
Thanks, Sybil. Maybe just to save time, I'll combine step 4 and 5, because and then we just move to Q&A. Would that work?
I think that makes sense, yeah.
Okay, so step 4 is where, we've mapped the relevant stakeholders, and we're in the context of a multi-stakeholder consultation workshop. Now, the handbook does provide guidance on how to organize a workshop. In the annex, you can find kind of an illustrative agenda. And remember, the output of that online interface was a kind of package of information that prepares you for the workshop, right? Or a desk review with interviews. So in this step, we'll be assessing the transformative potential of the shortlisted adaptation options generated. And at the end of this step, we'll have each adaptation priority reviewed either quantitatively or qualitatively against the different dimensions of transformative potential. Next slide. So Julie presented in the very beginning the main 6 elements of transformation against which each adaptation option is assessed. These include the climate rationale, private sector engagement, gender equality, whole of government approaches, technological innovation, and sustainable development outcomes, right? Each adaptation option would be reviewed and quantitatively scored for each of these elements in response to questions and guiding questions under each of these 6 elements, right? That would allow for conversation and then quantitative scoring, and combined with, since you'd be in the context of a stakeholder engagement workshop, qualitative justification for each of those scores, right? And then the tool automatically computes, once you input the values into the tool, a consolidated score across all 6 elements, and a results dashboard is generated. So next slide shows. So I'll preface this by saying I won't get into each adaptation or each indicator against which we're reviewing the adaptation option. This is an overview, but just to say that each adaptation option that we prioritize would be evaluated against the 6 elements and the 20 criteria here of transformative climate action potential. So for instance, we'd be looking at, for an adaptation option, what is its adaptation relevance? So what dimensions of adaptation results would the option be addressing? Is it vulnerability? Is it adaptive capacity? Is it longer term resilience? Are non-climatic drivers of vulnerability being addressed, right? So this is things around maybe existing exposure to other risks, poverty levels, food insecurity levels. Those sorts of elements would be considered here. And lastly, the opportunity to contribute to mitigation, so generate mitigation co-benefits, right? And questions you'll find within the handbook for each of these elements and indicators. You'll find a questionnaire in the annex that can be distributed to small working groups in a workshop where each adaptation option would be analyzed against the 6 elements and indicators, right? Now, the handbook also provides some guidance on potential data sources to draw upon for the evaluation that could be presented in the workshop or discussed, right? So for instance, with the climate rationale, we might draw upon existing climate risk and vulnerability assessments. Under the private sector component, we might look at existing cost-benefit analysis or kind of business case models. Under gender equality, existing gender studies focused on marginalized groups in agri-food systems. Under whole of government, we'll probably take into account different sectoral or national strategies. So, the topic of energy versus land use came up. We would be looking into those elements under this component. Under innovation, technological innovation, maybe drawing upon TNAs, so technology needs assessments, or I don't know, compendiums of indigenous people's knowledge that is relevant for adaptation. And lastly, sustainable development, right? So here we would be looking at existing statistics, maybe poverty maps or food insecurity and nutrition levels. That sort of data would be important under that component, right? Next slide, please. So this is just an illustrative snapshot of some of the results from the analysis. They're automatically calculated and they can be displayed at the workshop and interpreted as a group in a workshop setting. Now the handbook provides some guidance to the workshop moderator to walk a group through the interpretation of these results. And just to say that, these results provide kind of a snapshot of, based on inputs of a wide range of stakeholders, of which adaptation options hold the greatest potential for transformative change across all of the 6 elements of transformation. And it can, assist adaptation planners in undergoing this important prioritization process, right? Which is key for understanding what are the adaptation priorities to be taken forward for implementation as part of their programming and project pipeline development. And this is often so necessary against a backdrop of limited resources and competing investments, right? And at the same time, not only is this kind of quantitative scoring happening, but you're also collecting qualitative information that can serve as recommendations and as kind of guiding principles and recommendations for adaptation programming and investment pipeline going forward. Next slide. Again, another snapshot of the detail from the dashboard. So for each adaptation option reviewed, you have these kind of diagrams that are automatically generated for how they score up against the 6 dimensions. And I think it's, can also help when reflecting on, how have I designed my adaptation intervention? How can I maybe improve in certain areas of going forward in implementation to ensure that I'm developing a package of intervention that can touch upon all of the different levers of transformation, right? Now, if it's okay, I'll skip to step 5, which is just the closing slide. Right, so step 5 is really the moment in which we start to develop the actionable roadmap for implementing the adaptation options that were prioritized, right? This can be, again, in the workshop setting. So a facilitator may guide using the template provided in the handbook around questions like, what are the next steps for programming? Who's responsible? What are the main milestones? A mapping of which finance opportunities exist, which partners could be engaged. Can the program build on any existing projects or scale up any existing activities? And so in a way, the roadmap could be, is the ultimate output of the tool. It can serve as important communication instrument for sharing evidence on where opportunities lie for unlocking transformative change and guiding investments going forward. And I think my very last slide is just a snapshot of, next slide, of some examples coming out of the SCALA program where we had mentioned this tool has been applied and is guiding adaptation programming at different scales in Uganda and Costa Rica and in Thailand. And I think that's where I end, and back over to you, Sybil.
I just quickly wanted to say that if colleagues from Mongolia are willing, then maybe we can take 5 minutes from their segment so that you can answer the questions from step 4 and step 5. So if that's okay, we can. So if we do that, then we have 7 more minutes now for Q&A. Sybil, Crystal?
Thanks, Nish. Thanks for that time check. Yeah, I think we have a few questions in the chat, and thank you, Crystal, for walking us through. It is complex, but very helpful to see, just these 6 criteria. And thank you for walking us through the sort of subtopics of each of those criteria, the data that would be used to evaluate the adaptation actions based on those criteria, and sort of talking about how you could go about doing that, right, in working groups. And that, ultimately we wind up with adaptation options where we've assessed them for where there is potential for transformative change and prioritizing, as you say, in this sort of landscape of limited resources. So thank you for that. In the chat, we have a couple questions on gender and social inclusion, but we also have a question on, sorry, I've lost it now. On how to tailor the tool to address knowledge gaps and capacity constraints of different stakeholders, right? For example, smallholder farmers and large agribusinesses, if we're bringing them together to consult with them, what would we do to address the fact that they have different knowledge and different capacities? And maybe you could highlight, some of the suggestions in the handbook about data sources, right? That the idea is that this is creating transparency amongst stakeholders because it's trying to put people on a level playing field, right? In terms of drawing on similar sets of information. But I don't know if you want to have anything to add to that question.
Yeah, I think that's also the point, right? Is that we all come from different places of knowledge, capacities, and priorities. And so the purpose of the multi-stakeholder engagement process is to, like you said, Sybil, try to put us on a level playing field where we're all bringing something to the table, right? And recognizing that there is differences amongst different stakeholder groups and what their contribution is to this greater kind of transformation process, right?
Okay, and then I'm going to combine now 2 questions because I think maybe if we could reshare the slides with the step 4, and you could go back maybe to the criteria and the results, because we have a question here from Sarah asking or saying, it is difficult to grasp the implication of the diagrams referring to prioritization from the 6 criteria. And indeed, I think if you could go back and explain a little bit more about, once you've answered these questions on the criteria and you have these visual results, what are those results telling you? Why, what would I do based on that information? What would that help me to see that I couldn't see before? And she's asking, would the numbers 1 to 5 be indicating 5 indicates most effective transformative action? So yeah, if you could just sort of illustrate that a little bit more, and maybe if you can focus a little bit on gender and social inclusion, because this other question we have is, it seems that the current situation is still far away. So what is the challenge? So if you could maybe also explain a bit about the criteria of assessing the GSI components, then we could answer those 2 questions together. Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah, sure. So it was hard to present, kind of capture the results of the tool in a slide-based form, because the tool does have this larger dashboard where it might be easier to interpret the results. But in any case, what you're seeing here is the result of the scoring. So 0 to 5, 5 being the highest level of transformative change potential and 0 being the lowest. And the way that the assessment process worked in this example is that a particular adaptation option, say adaptation 1, was reviewed against its current status of implementation. So this is how my country is performing with respect to, I don't know, agroforestry interventions in a certain geographical area, right? And against what would my planned adaptation program look like? Because I'm tackling the 6 dimensions of transformative change with this more holistic approach, right? So not thinking one-dimensionally, my goal is, I don't know, purely greenhouse gas emission reductions, but my goal is actually multidimensional, and the factor takes into the various factors that often lead to maladaptation, right? If not addressed sufficiently. So for instance, in the gender equality, social inclusion dimension, we're taking into account 3 criteria. And maybe even Sybil, you're the gender expert on the SCALA team. You could walk us through why each of those 3 factors are fundamental for ensuring gender equality and social inclusion within the context of climate action.
Yeah, well, I mean, just going back to the original questions, that the baseline is showing, work to be done. I think there is evidence for that, but I think there's also a lot of good evidence of what would make plans actually result in gender responsive action, right? The challenge here is to try to ensure that what's been written in the plans vis-a-vis, women's empowerment or even stakeholder engagement actually happens in practice. And so I think the 3 criteria here on GSI are really about questioning the extent to which the actions would promote women's empowerment, but also knowledge of different groups, including Indigenous peoples, and also ensure equal benefits. And so the kind of 3 criteria of gender responsive plans are along those lines. And I think we've seen results from the different countries that indeed, while there may be uh, higher baselines, not all adaptation actions, inherently promote equality, and therefore it's a critical dimension of the 6 criteria. Um, Thank you. It's a complex question, and I'm mindful of time. I'm seeing more questions coming in. I think if we agree, maybe while our Mongolia colleagues speak, Crystal could also answer some of these questions that have come in the chat, because I really do think hearing from our colleagues about how they've used the tool would actually answer some of these questions. In fact, we have a question now about, can the tool be used to assess a project that did not start with climate in mind? Yeah, so if everyone agrees, the idea was to sort of give you a sense of what the tool is, but then really hear from those who've been using it, which I think is an important illustration. So I think we'll end Crystal's presentation here. Of course, we're available for further conversations and as I said, further responses in the chat. But now it's my pleasure to move to the next portion of our webinar today. I have 2 colleagues here from UNDP and FAO Mongolia. We have Undarmar Korelbatar, who is a training associate with UNDP Mongolia, and then we also have Sergelin Munku, who is with FAO Mongolia. He's the coordinator of SCALA Mongolia. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sybil, for the introduction. And good afternoon, everyone, colleagues. This is my honor to share Mongolia's experience applying the CAR tool results and under the SCALA program. And today I will walk you through the process and key outcomes and also how the findings are being translated and reflected into the policy document, policy improvements, specifically on the NDC 3.0 and also the National Adaptation Planning. Next slide, please. So since the CAR tool is to, support the countries to assess and align their climate action and in agriculture, FAO sectors with their NDCs, especially Mongolia, we applied the CAR tool. First, in the initial stage, we assessed the overall system of, the climate policy environment and the existing policy strategies, and also the system itself related to the climate and agriculture priorities. And as well as we applied it to assess the NDC 2.0, which Mongolia submitted in 2020 to the UNFCCC. And currently also we are using the CAR tool results and applying it into, reflecting it into the NDC 3.0, which is currently being drafted and developed by the Mongolian government, especially in the developing the national agricultural targets and updating it also. And lastly, we also conducted multi-stakeholder, discussions and consultations, dialogues, and also the capacity building, which they need to, reflect these CAR matrix results into their, daily work. Next slide, please. So in order to save the time, let me go through the first initial CAR matrix result. So in Mongolia, there is an implementation action plan for the NDC 2.0, and which consists of over like 70 actions. And so using the CAR tool, we filtered out these 5 actions, which consists of from the adaptation and mitigation action. And as introduced by Julie and Crystal, we can see the criterias that goes under, climate rationally, and whether it's including the systematic approaches, and also whether it engages private sector entities, and also the GSI issue, and also the sustainable development, whether it's recognizing the sustainable development issue in the long run. And last but not least, when it comes to the climate adaptation in the agriculture sector, we think about, the technological inclusion and innovation inclusion. So these are the 5 actions that were scored. And when all 5 actions were ranked, as we can see, all 5 actions was ranked closely with the scores, which indicating shared agreement on their importance by all the stakeholders who, put the scores and contributed in the CAR matrix. And also, each action evaluated using scores across various criteria, which was explained before. So, okay, so let me move to the next slide. And so the overall process of conducting this CAR tool, applying the CAR tool, and receiving feedbacks from the various stakeholders, Mongolia, the leading government agency institutions are the one is Ministry of Food and Agriculture and Light Industry, which is in charge of the agriculture and light industry, agriculture-related, livestock-related issues as well. And also when we, think about the climate priorities, Ministry of Environment and Climate Change is also the leading government institution, one of them. And we are closely working with these two ministries, not only limited by them, but also in research institutions and other implementing agencies as well. And with the help of this, leading organizations and government institutions, we closely collaborated with them. And then the review began by assessing those actions from the NDC 2020 and also its action plan as well. And also we considered the other relevant sectoral policies. For example, in the agriculture sector, maybe it's the long-term or short-term strategies in gender aspects as well. And next step was the actions were categorized and using this NDC FAO target. And we primarily focused on the mitigation and adaptation as well. And the next slide will be presenting about, the how are those actions, this CAR matrix will be, is used to come up with this, conduct the system level assessment in Mongolia as well. So when it comes to the SLA in SCALA, it refers to the comprehensive evaluations of the interconnected systems. And especially in FAO sector, we need to focus on the climate change vulnerabilities in those areas, and also its interdependencies of those actions as well. And as a result, there are 5 system level assessments were conducted, and in Mongolia, the FAO and UNDP is, implementing the SCALA activities. So if from FAO side, livestock tax law implementation and feasibility of establishing forest strips around the arable land system level assessments were conducted. And the one is the forest belt, forest strip SLA is ongoing now. But the out of 3, the fruit and berries, SLAs on fruit and berries and surface water harvesting structure, and also the carbon national market schemes in pasture carbon sequestration was, conducted by the UNDP side, and it's the surface water harvesting structure system level assessment is almost being finalized, and the others are finished. And we, based on that, we generated a policy brief, and also we published some of the system level assessments as well. Next slide, please. So, in a nutshell, SCALA Mongolia is currently reflecting these, CAR matrix results into our, NAPs and indices as well. So what I would like to highlight is proposed by the SCALA team, the 4 actions were included in the National Adaptation Plan, which was submitted in 2024, last year, by Mongolian government. And because we used this CAR tool experience with collaborating with the multi-stakeholders, so which was really helpful to the national adaptation plan formulating process. And also the ongoing initiative is like we are supporting the NDC3 development specifically in the agriculture sector, updating the livestock target. And my colleague, Mr. Siriklan, will be talking about this. But before we move to the next slide, I would like to also mention about this, capacity building activity on the gender responsive climate budgeting training, which we held in last March in the first quarter, which was very successful, and we received a lot of positive feedbacks and because the climate budgeting and the allocation is very important, considering the gender being the actions shall be very gender responsive and climate responsive. So the audiences were really interested into this topic, and they were, really interested to the next step of this training as well. So let me stop here and let me hand it over to my colleague, Mr. Siriklang from FAO side. Thank you very much.
Hi, quickly just giving a time check again. We have 12 minutes, and that includes the Q&A. So maybe we can plan accordingly. Sargulan, thank you so much. And thanks again for giving up some of your time. So sorry to rush you through this. Sargulan, you're on mute.
Okay. Can you hear now? So I'm happy to continue to introduce the latest CAR tool application in Mongolia for NDC update process within the agriculture sector, which includes these 5 steps. So first step is to we have to inform the members of NDC working group for agriculture sector about the NDC2 stock taking results and lessons learned. From that, we have proposed mitigation and adaptation priority areas reflecting Mongolia's national characteristics based on previous experience, as well as considering National Adaptation Plan and the SCALA SLA system level assessment results that Underma recently showed you. And in the third step, SCALA project prepared and conducted a simplified online survey for local participants about mitigation and adaptation climate options for both livestock and arable farming sector. On the fourth step, Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Environment has supported us by sending official letters to provincial agricultural and environmental authorities, and officials were invited to participate in the survey. And we have then analyzed the results of the survey, presented to the key stakeholders, which means NDC Working Group for Agriculture and MOFALI, METS, and other development agencies who are working on NDC agriculture part. That were the recent process we have carried out. So next slide. So that's the result of the online survey. We have in total 104 participants, provincial agriculture officials and provincial environmental officials, and research and academia and development organizations and others. They have actively participated in the survey. So that's just the overview. Next slide. A few days ago, we have organized a workshop for assessing climate targets and actions for Mongolian agriculture and land use sector using climate action review tool. The main goal of this workshop was to invite relevant stakeholders, especially the provincial departments in the environment and agriculture who are participated in the survey. Also the youth representatives in the workshop to inform, validate this CAR results to the participants on the agriculture climate targets for NDC 3.0 and to show CAR tool principles how to define targets in objective and measurable way. So in this exercise, we have the support of the Mongolian youth organization Green.Climate Mongolia NGO. This NGO has conducted this interactive survey on the example one climate mitigation target for livestock sector. This you are seeing, this one is about this livestock mitigation target. Livestock numbers should be aligned with the pasture carrying capacity by improving the economic turnover, livestock, and reducing pasture load. So you are seeing these 6 elements. By them, the 20 indicators are responded by the participants on the workshop, and the overall the score you are seeing on the right above. So next slide. This is my last slide. This is about this example adaptation action, establishing forest shelter belts around arable farming. So you are seeing also these 6 elements of the climate action review tool that are also responded by the workshop participants through the 20 indicators. So also you are seeing the overall indicator of overall score of this transformative climate action that are defined in Mongolian stakeholders. So I think that's my last slide. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much to our colleagues Undurma and Sergil. And I think seeing that illustration of how the tool was applied in different ways was really, really helpful. I really appreciated, we heard the process of using the tool in SCALA itself, and how then based on the results of the tool, the team carried out some additional analyses to kind of further understand the priorities that emerged from that tool use. And then it was helpful to see that you were able to provide inputs to both the NAP and NDC 3.0. And I really want to flag that you also mentioned, related capacity building and also, trainings, right? So of course, that the tool helps sort of point the direction also in terms of additional support activities for implementation. And Sergilin, really interesting to see how in the workshop setting you could use the tool not only for adaptation, but for also mitigation to get the kind of different viewpoints. And nice to see again those visuals. They are complex, but I think the more we see them, the more we get familiar with what that visualization is sort of telling us and helping us to sort of see in terms of decision making. So we have a few more minutes for any Q&A, specifically for on the Mongolia experience. And confirming in the chat that there is going to be the recording will be shared, and we have shared, of course, the links. I'm seeing if there's anything in the Q&A box in chat specifically. If we have any questions for our Mongolia colleagues. As you can see, they were working at national level primarily, right? But actually, a question I would have is, just a question on the stakeholders, because that has been a topic that's come up, and how do we create a space where different stakeholders are empowered to contribute to this decision-making process? Could you reiterate, beyond, of course, working directly with the ministries, the stakeholders you worked with in using this tool, and were there any, subnational stakeholders that were involved?
Yes, indeed. As I mentioned, we have 21 provinces in Mongolia, so each province has environmental and agricultural offices. So we have almost each one have around five officials working in each sector. So they were very interested in participating in the workshop in person. So we have had some kind of competition of who can participate in the workshop. Also, I would like to highlight, also we have this your representative who are invited into the workshop. So I think it's very important we have now involving youth organizations and youth representatives into this kind of consultations. So that's very important, I think.
Thank you. I see we have one question in the chat, which we do have time to take. So the question is, how are you following up the actions implemented and what's their impact, right? So I think it's sort of about asking you now that you've, used the tool, what's your follow-up to the information generated by the tool, and then what do you think is the expected impact of having assessed for transformative potential? So thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question because the NDC2, previous NDC, we have lessons learned from stock taking that it says the target definition for NDC2 were not really involving stakeholders of the country. Therefore, it was for the implementation, it was difficult to achieve more than 50%. So this time we are focusing on to involve all type of stakeholders into this consultation, at least to inform the agriculture sector, all parties about the climate targets, the main climate targets for the livestock and arable farming sector. Once this NDC 3.0 is approved by Mongolian government, there will be NDC action plan. So we will have kind of consent on this overall priority area. So we will be easy to have much objective and implementable NDC actions for the NDC 3.0. So that's my hope that will be very transformative. So in the next 5 and 10 years.
Thank you. That's very clear. So really, you've been able to involve stakeholders more in the new NDC, right? NDC 3.0, which is critical for them to be part of implementation. So learning from the past to improve in the future, and have more involvement in the actual action plan and implementation. So really critical. Thank you for that point and for sharing your experience. If you have more questions for the colleagues Undormar and Sergelen, please do put them in the chat. They're here and clearly have a lot of insights. So let's move on though to our next portion, because we do have another speaker, Kripta Sitathani, sorry, from UNDP. Who will be speaking from his experience. He's coordinating the UNDP climate promise work in Asia Pacific. So he knows a lot about applying the tool beyond project implementation and these broader processes. So Krib, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sybil. Really, I just want to start before I start diving into the presentation itself. Basically, the work that the Crystal, Sergey, and Endemar has shown really embodies what the process that the NDC 3.0 does. Next slide, please. So it's when you look at NDC 3.0 development, which is countries across the globe are currently processing and developing, there are 4 basic steps. The first is really what Sergelen mentioned earlier about the stock take, which is basically really taking a look at the NDC 2.0 and how it's progressing and what are the challenges and lessons learned from that. So that's the stock taking part. Then you move on to a little bit of coordination and building buy-ins to gather, okay, what do we want to do for the next new cycle of NDCs? And then the third is basically target setting and developing the policy alignment. And lastly, it's about looking at costing and how you want to implement these climate actions. And this is a simplified version of how the NDC 2.0s are developed. If you remember what Crystal and Sergelen and Endemar highlighted are the 5 steps of the CAR tool. So they are basically, the first one's preparation, then the second is really shortlisting, and the third is around mapping, and fourth is about assessing and prioritizing. And the last but not least is implementation. How do we then take the CAR tool, which is a 5-step process, in trying to take it for the NDC 3.0, which is basically the first option is really to use the CAR tool as a evidence-based prioritization. How you go about that is to go through from the step 1 to step 4. And the other option is really to focus on really improving to have more meaningful stakeholder consultation, which is for step 3 and 4 specifically. Next slide, please. So I think many of you have already heard quite a bit already that, how the CAR tool itself, it's a lot of its inner working is the process to really drive prioritization. So for this case, I'm trying to take it out a little bit outside the agriculture land use, dive in a little bit into more of the interconnected nature of climate action. So for this case, I'll probably try to give you a visual of, let's say, we're trying to use a food systems assessment into prioritization for climate action moving forward. So the first step is really to map the policy and identify entry points, right? In order to do that, what you want to do is really start looking at what is there in place, such as, NDC 2.0s, the NAPs, the National Climate Policy, the long-term strategy, the National Economic Development. Is it prioritized? Are there national food systems pathway or specific, very specific policy on value chain for the food system, whether it be rice, grain, fruits, poultry, you name it. So it can be looking at different policy spaces and where does this fit? How does this fit into the because it doesn't have to be purely sector specific. It can be beyond sector, cross-cutting or multiple sectors. So this is starting to see that picture and where our entry points are. Then the second step is really looking at, okay, which is identifying high impact options. So we look at all these options available to take action on the food system, whether it be looking at how it's being aligned to the NDC or national agricultural strategies, or any value chain analysis that has been conducted, or any coverage that also looks at. And also, really most important, I think one of the bigger two additional points that you want to consider for like food system is the vulnerability of these of the both socioeconomic consideration as well as the environmental vulnerability in the sense of how it balances out with what the intervention you're trying to look at as well. And last but not least is also about looking at the carbon mitigation co-benefit, which is basically if there's a carbon emission reduction potential of these options as well across the entire value chain. So once you do that, you go back to a little bit looking at really evaluating the transformative potential. Through the scoring that Crystal and Sergey and Andamar has highlighted, it's a similar process, but this is done in a wider stakeholder consultation, not limited by a sectoral action. Even if it's a sectoral consultation, I still would want to really encourage you to widen the network and stakeholder that you consult, and really look at to include other line industry, other private sector across the entire value chain, or looking at CSOs, NGOs, minority groups, women's groups, indigenous communities, rural communities, local authorities, and other stakeholders that have a wider stake into this entire food value chain, whether it be from the raw material all the way down to delivery person that delivers whatever the food is to the grocery or to the homes once now that we do have a bit more delivery to homes of food as well. So how their consideration are taken into this can also feed into how you assess and score this transformative potential. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is really, I think this speaks to a little bit of my earlier intervention in really responding to the participant Lido's question about how energy transition come into the agriculture sector and how that land use. Because oftentimes what we've seen previously is there's been limited engagement, as Circular has highlighted, that there are limited engagement with stakeholders. So we really want to encourage both you as governments as well as external partners, private sector activists or enthusiasts into the climate space to really try to get more involved, to seek out consultation, to provide inputs into this process. So really the meaningful stakeholder consultation rests on two key areas, basically. The first one is really whoever's leading this process need to map out to ensure that we have a wide reach as possible in terms of really looking at who we're trying to seek to engage with. Widen the consultations as much as possible, which I want to stress again, to look at minority groups, gender equality and social inclusion, as well as indigenous communities, as well as NGOs, and also private sector along the food value chain. Because if you include more, yes, I do agree and know that this is really adding complexity to the consultation process, but this is also will ensure that first and foremost, you leave no one behind. Second, whatever solution you come up with in the long term, they'll be agreed and carried out in a more sustainable in that way. So that's about the mapping and also the consultation. So in order to bring this to really have a whole society approach, you want to have as big of a tent as possible. So bringing in a different stakeholder consultation, but during the consultation process, do bring out a framework. We're proposing the CAR tool framework for this to score, to assess, to look at, but it's one tool to really use to get all the stakeholder to discuss it based on common areas and common language, because that's where I think it's easier to start the conversation, especially those that are really difficult, like energy transition, how that plays into the farming community and farm needs, and as well as the food system as a whole. So these type of conversation needs a basis to have the vocabularies and the conversation to be constructive. So that's one of the really key point here. And so that's the two main process and tools that the CAR tool can be applied for the NDC 3.0 development. I want to stress also that for the National Adaptation Plan, which has similar flows to the NDC 3.0 development process, you can use the CAR tool as well. So that's also using a similar framework, similar logic with the prioritization and the multi-stakeholder consultation. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Crib. Really happy to kind of conclude with your views because, originally this tool was designed more for moving from plans to implementation, but very exciting to see, in this year of NDC 3.0, your views on how we can actually use this tool to, improve certainly multi-stakeholder collaboration, et cetera, joint priority setting. So thank you for those words of wisdom. And colleagues, we are near the end of our journey together today. Thank you for sticking with us because we've covered a lot, but I hope that, seeing the tool presented and then the example from Mongolia and Crib's views on further application give you some inspiration. With these last few minutes, we want to open the floor for any other questions, comments. Please put them in the chat or the Q&A, wherever you find a spot. They can be for Crib or for any of our previous speakers. Oh, well, we have a compliment. Thanks for you all. It was really relevant. Glad to hear it. I think, our Mongolian colleagues really did illustrate, the applicability in the national government setting. Um, and of course, this is not your last chance to ask questions. We will share the materials and we invite you to reach out to us. Um, we have an interesting observation here from Bertrand in the chat. Worthwhile to suggest using the CAR tool in procurement or TORs for starting a prioritization process. Can guide teams save time on methodological aspects? Excellent, thank you. Please do consult the handbook because it is, you know, very practical and clearly explains, I think, the different steps. Thank you for those of you that mentioned also kind of youth participation in the chat. I think that's really important space that we can all contribute to. Okay, I'm seeing hands clapping and thank you. I'm not seeing any questions. So thank you so much. Since we do have a few minutes left, I would like to ask your participation one last time. We had one last Zoom poll to ask you a question at the end. So if we can just launch that poll, anyone who has a few more minutes could answer that. We have someone thinking about using the tool in the handbook for research in the Philippines. Great, we'd love to hear what you find and how your research can help us improve it. Nisha, do we have the poll?
Yes, I'm just getting that.
Thank you. I think I need a training on Zoom, Zoom polls. Besides the card tool, there's always
Sorry, it's taking, yeah.
no problem.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So here it's another open-ended question. We wanted to hear your takeaways. So if you have any, a thing that stood out for you, a takeaway message, a thought or a question, something that you learned, um, something you'd like to know more about. If you're thinking about using aspects of the tool, we already heard maybe for some research. So we'd really appreciate hearing back from you if you have any takeaways off the top of your head to help us also think about how to take the work forward. And we can put in the chat one more time the links. Okay, I think we have a couple answers coming in, so we'll give the poll another minute or two if you want to share takeaways, and then we can conclude with that. I know these online sessions are not ideal, but it's been a pleasure. The ideal scenario would be, Crystal going to each country and having an in-person session where we could open the tool together and insert data and work through it. But unfortunately, of course, that's not always possible. So thank you for joining us for 2 full hours to really go through all these details. I think maybe we all need also a mission to Mongolia to learn directly from our colleagues there. Okay, well, we've gotten a few answers, so maybe we can just close that poll. and
Okay,
just see the takeaways.
sure.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for participating up to the last moment.
I think I'll have to do the same thing where I will have to share the results, results,
Okay.
and just share my screen.
Okay. Um, Thanks, Nisha. Okay. Great. So we have 17 answers. Thank you. Thanks. I will suggest we have a WhatsApp group. Great to stay connected. The importance of peer-reviewed and trustworthy tools that make the job easier for policymakers. Reaching a wide number of stakeholders. Thanks for that takeaway. Learning about youth participation. Yeah, I think there's more work to be done there. Structured tools to systematically identify. Okay. Linking vulnerability factors with adaptation entry points. Thank you. More experience of the tool in countries. Yeah, I agree. Some more illustrations really help to see, and we'll be working on documenting those as well. Okay, and someone's observing here to use the tool both in the adaptation and mitigation strategies and for updating NDC 3.0. Indeed. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah Lynn, as well. In contributing to NDC as well. Okay, not sure if it's suitable in Botswana. Okay, maybe aspects of the tool or some inspiration from some of the dimensions, right? This idea of transformative adaptation and what dimensions should we be looking at? Made to more focused on how to valorize in many R&D projects. True. And research, yeah. Again, it's not a not a scientific tool, right? It's not, there are a lot of different types of assessments, which was pointed out, but this is really a means to get people together, focusing on what priorities have been established and how to take them forward in a way that's really, inspiring, triggering transformative change, right? So thank you everyone for your time today, for showing up, for participating, for asking questions. And it was a real pleasure to hear your feedback and to engage with you. So thanks especially to all of our speakers for your time today to prepare, to share. And I think, there's not much need for an extensive closing. Just to say again, thank you to everyone for your participation. And it's really inspiring to hear from so many people working on adaptation, especially in agriculture and land use, who want to make a difference, who are identifying the entry points through which they can contribute, and who are seeing an opportunity to really move from the planning process to implementation. So again, thank you everyone, and we look forward to further interactions and communications, and wishing you a good rest of your day wherever you are, and be well. Thanks everyone.